Hey Brian, how you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Excellent. So glad to be here.
Where would you like to begin?
Well, we are Brian and Kevin. We're two founding members of Liminal Learning, and we are both going to be present at the first quest and quests beyond. Both very excited about sort of belonging in this community. There's about how many of there's 6 or 7 of us? I can't. Anyways, my brain doesn't count fast, but and we're sort of designing and plugging our passions into what we hope for a quest to be for 16 young people who are going to join us for a week in the woods with some philosophy and creativity and psychology and design and joy as we sort of try to figure out how to thrive as adults. And we decided it would be cool to unpack our particular passions, the things that brought us here, that made our lives sort of fitted to taking young people into the woods and caring about the well-being of each other and the planet and all of that stuff. And Brian and I have met in flesh once in the woods in a place that we were hoping to do one of these quests. And
Very beautiful place, wasn't it?
It was beautiful. Yeah, it was beautiful. We're not going to be there. We're going to be in another beautiful place. Ontario, Canada, where we are, has plenty of opportunity for canoeing and lakes and moose. And so anyways, we found another moose, and we're going to go there in Algonquin Park. But yeah, Brian and I, if I might speak from my own heart, hit it off wonderfully. And he has a philosophy that he's working on called neither nor. And it is becoming a foundation for the way that we are going to engage with each other and sort of enact our passions in the woods and to begin the quest, which is actually a year-long endeavor that we will do in community. So from my perspective, I've just been sort of fascinated. I've listened to all of his podcasts on Neither Nor, on Clear Story, which you should check out if you're compelled. And I am my thing is creativity. I'm an educator and been working with creativity, and I'm excited and warmed by the ways in which Neither Nor just fits delightfully into my practice as a teacher, my practice with creativity as a vehicle to helping young people and help myself fit better in the world and have more joy and thriving.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of overlap between what I'm on and what you're working on. Do you like to talk a little bit about creativity and how you think about that?
Yeah, thanks. Yes, I would. So creativity, like I've been teaching for nigh on, just almost 30 years now, and I was lucky enough to find creativity as sort of the central vehicle for how I taught. And I've taught music, I've taught film, but I've also taught like English and tech and stuff like that. On some level, this is an important point for me. It doesn't matter what you're doing. Could be science or math. Those don't happen to be my domains, but a creative posture in the world is one that is useful for seeing the world in interesting ways and sort of falling in love with the world around you and diving deeper into yourself. And one important thing for me that I have to sort of tell people quickly is that it's not art. When I talk about creativity, we often sort of like in our culture assume that a creative is someone who paints or makes music or puts something on a gallery wall, and that would be the goal of the creative act would be to create a thing that other people can ooh and ah at. I'm trying to parse those things apart quite clearly and say that creativeness in your life as a practice, something that you can will yourself with agency towards seeing the world with a creative sort of aesthetic lens, and that it is not a requirement to create something of beauty, but it is a way of reframing the world and your place in it and having some agency to see beauty and truth and goodness about. And I think that's where, if I might pass the baton, neither nor and creativity speak quite a bit about this frame shifting, a way of changing the habits of mind deliberately to see the world freshly, if that's a good word. Is that landing? Is a place where these things
Yeah,
touch?
absolutely. So creativity as a practice, I really love that. And neither nor is looking at two ways of knowing the world, one through conceptual actions and the other through direct experience and intuition. And so this reframing is really important. The kind of understanding within neither nor is that there is no view from nowhere. So there's not
Yes.
a way to look at things without any frame. That's part of my assumption. But there are ways to switch frames and become sort of fluent in other ways of knowing, and being able to switch conceptual frames is very useful for making progress on certain types of problems. So I'm looking at the kind of long history of philosophy. There's many different strands to Western philosophy, but many of them assume that a kind of frame is correct. And what neither nor is saying is these frames can be useful in certain contexts. It's not really a propositional thing where I'm saying this philosophy is right and this one's wrong, but more like, where did this philosophy come from historically? What are its effects on its adherents? And so how does it change your life if you adopt this philosophy? And that might relate to what you're talking about in terms of switching your frame on experience. Is that right?
Yeah, you're nailing it. And I'm glad you glommed on, or you sort of velcroed on to creativity as a practice. And the practice is that in some deep way. And when I'm doing this with students, I'm talking explicitly about recognizing that with some sort of playful games, you can find yourself transcending the normal way that you conceive of a thing. And you do this with sort of like, it's almost like, not shocking your system, but like throwing you into an experience in which you force yourself to look at something differently and playfully and usually quickly and joyfully and often in community, so that within a short amount of time you sort of like have cracked through the habit of mind that saw this thing as let's use your language, like the map of the thing, like, oh, it's a tree, I know what a tree is, it's a tree. And you have like a solid, and you have a little image in your head, and it's like a two-dimensional version of this thing. But if I ask you to go right up and smell it and like touch it and like look at the moss on it, and oh my God, there's little tiny ants or little bugs, and I don't know, each leaf has its own attenuation on it's like the moreness of your potential relationship to that thing, and a playful way that you can, like, all your memories of climbing trees as a kid, and I don't know, you just roll with new and more and crack the map, and now you're experiencing treeness.
Yes.
And that's a joyful thing, and a creative needs to do that, like that you need to invigorate the world and your perceptions with intention and with joy. And hopefully this is another part that really important to me for the quest, in community. There's something about the creative act shared amongst people that creates a kind of intimacy that our culture is not particularly good at, I think, and fear, and to have experience. Like, my job as a teacher is to create community. And when it's thriving, there's this sort of fire, right? It's just like happens, and the kids are laughing and engaged, and they're like, they're getting to this place. Like a party can have that quality where it just sort of lifts up, and it's like, it's more than a bunch of individuals. It is a sort of it becomes its own thing, right? The party has a vibe, right?
Yes.
And that feeling is something that we can strive for in our lives. We can nurture it and we can practice it. And a creative practice in the woods, doing a quest with others, I hope we can sort of get to that place, acknowledge that it's happening amongst us, realize that creativity has an intimacy because the moreness that I'm talking about is in you and it's in others, so we can reciprocally engage. And you find that there's a belonging and a care and a meaning amongst people who are striving to maintain and sustain a creative frame.
Yes.
That I think can change lives. It's kind of bold, but I'm hoping that's what these quests will do. They'll sort of helium us. If I'm making I don't know if it's a verb out of a light, a floating air of helium that can just sort of like, I can get a lofty perspective and I can hold it and I can stay in touch with this thing and I can build a life, an artful life with that frame.
That's amazing. Yeah. I really like this idea of moreness, both at the kind of party, it's more than the sum of its parts. It has its own kind of organic feel to
Yes.
it. And I would hope that these kind of quests that bring really different types of people together of different ages and different interests and disciplines would also be really generative and have kind of more than just the individual experience of every participant. And at the same time, in a kind of neither nor sense, there's that moreness of, yes, it's very useful to have the conceptual category of tree or oak tree or whatever. I'm in North London, so I'm kind of surrounded by oak trees here. Mm-hmm. But every tree, as you were saying, if you go up and smell it and feel it and touch it, is unique, right? And not only is every tree unique, but every experience of any individual tree is unique. You're never encountering the same experience on some level. And so this way of breaking frames or kind of breaking the mold, I think of it as a way of getting off autopilot, kind of. We can go through life where everything feels familiar and safe and constrained in a way. And it is very useful to have those constraints, right? Mm-hmm. Want to be able to, get through the morning and get to where we're going and all these kind of things that depend on level of stability. At the same time, if we always reside in that place of comfort, we are missing out on some aspect of life, right?
Here. Maybe more than some. I mean, I'm not going to put a number on it, but there is a lot outside of our habitual frames. There's a lot more, and yeah, wouldn't it be sweet to live a life in which you practice access to the more, in community with people, and I
go
pardon me.
I was going to say one of the thinkers that has been a big influence on me is a Russian formalist critic called Viktor Shklovsky. And he has this idea called defamiliarization. And he thinks this is one of the purposes of art. So I know you said that creativity is not always, the goal of creativity is not to always produce an artistic product. But at the same time, there can be something when we experience great art that can break our everyday frame, right? And Shklovsky is looking specifically at Tolstoy and the ways in which Tolstoy finds these techniques to describe a situation. So, for example, someone goes to this Russian ball, but he's like not a part of Russian society, and so he sees it as if like a child or as an outsider, right? And then this is an excuse within the narrative structure to describe it as it is, not through its own concepts, right? But or as the way as it is a little loaded, but maybe at that sensory level of experience of this is what I'm seeing directly in front of me and not this is a familiar ritual that happens at formal events or something like that.
And you don't have access to the prejudices of a person who's familiar.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes.
No,
and so
great.
there's
that's great.
many ways. And, young people have necessarily more access to this than older people, I would think.
Yeah, man, well said.
Yeah.
Man.
Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, that's good, man. And that speaks to the idea of liminality, which sometimes I concern, like we're calling this thing liminal learning, and to be fair, a lot of people rightly won't know what that word means.
Yes.
Right? It's, and there's no judgment if you don't. I mean, I don't think I knew it, when I was 35, but you're touching on it here, right? Like there's something about youth, like being 19, 21, where you're just like adulting, right? You're just getting into this place where, that shit's real. And that's sort of what liminal is. It's the space between sort of, in this case, maybe childhood and adulthood, right? It's this time, the threshold or the hallway between those two parts of self and those two eras of life. And
right. And it's related to the word limit, right? So this kind of transitional period or a border or threshold, like you said, which is between two stages, right? Kind of live in two worlds at once or something like that.
Yes. Nice. And I just want to complete that circle where you were saying there's something about being young and not having, like you can go into that ballroom of adulthood, if I might use your Tolstoy metaphor, with new eyes, right? Like whatever, oh my goodness, I got balloons there. Did everyone see that? Was that just, you can sort of, as a young person in a liminal space in the between two sort of chapters of life, you can have the habit of seeing things fresh and not just accept the adult roles that seem to be offered by culture just because, that's what adults do. They have briefcases, they get up early and they're grumpy. If that's, like if you're kind of scared of like looking at the adult world, you're taking a conception of it, a judgment of it. And I think liminal learning and neither nor sort of offer a stance that says, no, we can look at adulthood afresh. We don't have to accept the roles, the prejudices. I'm not using that word in the way you might expect, to prejudge what it might be to be an adult. Creativity, neither nor, as a stance in the world, might offer us young people more, right? That we can have a broader spectrum expectation of what our futures might hold.
And that sense of moreness again, right?
Yeah, man.
And one of our other contenders, Isabella Granick, will probably have more to say about this, but I think one of the reasons I went to childhood is that in childhood you're learning all the words, you're learning all the frames, right? And so they are kind of malleable, but then sometimes it can be the case that you learn a frame and you kind of grab onto it and you think this provides stability. And so there might be kind of developmental stages where you go from, for example, I know it happens in grammar that, learn a rule and then they start overcorrecting, even irregular verbs. And so it's like, almost like you don't know the rule, then you know the rule and you over apply it. And then there's another way to learn to switch sets of rules or something like that. And I think that's very much what neither nor is looking at, if that resonates for you.
It sure does. And that, what a sweet time on a quest with 16 other young people who are, let's say, wise enough to try to find a posture towards their adulthood, right? Like that are searching, yearning, hoping, caring about themselves and the world sufficiently to take some time out of whatever patterns are being adopted. You're working at a restaurant, you're going to university, you're going to college, you're working at your dad's, auto shop, whatever it might be. there's something in you that's going, yeah, maybe there's more. Maybe these frames are not the entirety of my potential or the potential of the world, or, the rails, if a train metaphor, that culture is offering are too restrictive, right? And maybe there's maybe they're not rails, maybe there's country roads, maybe there's paths, right, diverging.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what, you
that.
you mentioned
one final
Isabella.
thing. The
oh yeah, go ahead.
I think just to bring it back to the group,
Mm-hmm.
because these frames, and it might be easy to think of it as like a pair of glasses that you put on, and it affects the way that you individually and only you perceive the world. But I think there's something really important to the fact that the ways we see the world are shared. And so part of what liminal learning is hoping to do is to bring people together to come up with group ways of knowing that allow cohorts to emerge, or groups of people that can see the world in a new and shared way, right? Because I could just sit back and say, I'm going to invent a new whole vocabulary for my experience. But if I don't share that with you, it remains kind of inert, and it's not alive in that way that the party is, right?
I want to share with you, Brian, that I got goosebumps on that one. That felt exactly right. That landed really sweetly in my flesh. Yeah. It's also a little cold in here, so I think there's some there's some embodied coldness. But no, that was great, man. Thanks for tying the shared imaginal, right? Like the narratives we have in our culture feel real, and they might be restrictive, and they might not be appropriate for your soul, for your emergence into adult, to being a 30-year-old, right? Let's fucking get that figured out at
I love
19, and together, community is so important. And the community part is energy too, right? It's like, once you find a sort of a tribe and a shared imaginal, a shared new lens, because you're right, this is a very singular metaphor, and it's not appropriate. And I've never quite heard it said that way, so that's how I think the goosebumps came. It's like we all can do this, and we can look at each other anew. And that's one thing that's so beautiful about the intimacy. I think I did mention creativity and intimacy. When you are being creative amongst others, there's a certain kind of vulnerability required, where you're not in the habitual, this is Kevin Bowers, this is who I am, and so I've created a persona or a shell that is safe and understandable. But we get 16 young people together and intentionally allow ourselves open all together. The kinds of intimacy that are going to be available to us might really surprise you, right? It might be a bit scary too, by the way, right? It might be like, whoa, there's parts of me in this social space that are, but good news is you're going to be amongst caring people and a bunch of adults who have considered this, right? Like we're in this, man, because something about our meaning in life, something about our care for the world, community, each other, culture wars, just bullshit in the planet, get to my age and I'm like, I really care, and I really need to be active in helping create that shared imaginal and that vulnerability and that community and that intimacy, both for the individuals and for the planet. Like I get lofty sometimes when I go down these roads, so you'll have to deal with me, I'm afraid.
Beautiful.
So Brian mentioned Isabella, who is Brian and I are founding members, but I would say she's the founder of the founding members. Does that sound right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, and she's an amazing human being, and her passion and angle, I'm not going to frame it too tightly because that would be a violence to her genius, but developmental psychology, and sort of she comes from a rich understanding. And I think Bryan knows Isabella for years, if I'm not mistaken, and has worked closely. In fact, so perhaps what we'll do, because we're trying to keep these videos reasonable size, we're going to have another one of these with Isabella, and either Bryan and I are going to be chatting with her, or yeah, that's right, because we're doing sort of a tag team here. So I'm going to sort of hand the baton to Bryan to sort of introduce the next conversation, if that sounds fair, about Isabella, and maybe string together how what we've just talked about might be taken up by the insights that Isabella offers.
I know Isabella is particularly interested in sort of phase transitions within development, and how some of the frames you might have get completely transformed through these processes. I talked about adaptation, this idea of reusing the way that, re-encountering and transforming. So I know she's particularly interested in adolescence and early adulthood as these periods where a lot of things transform. So it's not that you leave behind all experience and encounter everything completely anew, but a lot of the old frames that you have get shifted around in some way. And I think I'll probably leave it open beyond that.
Yeah, that sounds great. So either Bryan or I will have a conversation, and it will probably be sitting somewhere near wherever you're seeing this. There'll probably be another one, and we're going to sort of hand the baton around. And by the end of it, if our plan goes, there will be several videos like this, all of which will be sharing the passions, interests, personalities of the people that you would meet, and who would be designing the quests and the year of liminal learning that we hope to build and sort of seed the world with liminal learners. Yeah. That sound good?
Great. Thank you, Kevin.
Yeah, thanks, Bryan. This is really delightful.
Really enjoyed talking to you.
See you in the woods.
See you in the woods.